In this video, we will look at Zord. Zord is a schema declaration and validation library which allows you to create schemas, and Zord will generate TypeScript types for them, and it also helps you with validation against any kind of input. So if you have an input and if you run a validation against that Zord schema, if there are any errors with that input, it will throw out those errors, and it's pretty useful for many different cases, as we will see in this tutorial. So we are at Zord.dev, which is Zord's documentation, and it will give you a basic idea about how this works. So it says TypeScript first, schema validation with static type inference. So what this means is that you can generate your schema once and you can use it for validation and as well as generating static TypeScript types for them. So you do not need to create types and run your own validation. It will do all of this under the hood. So it's pretty fun. And if we go down, if we go to introduction here, they have more about the purpose. So the goal here is to eliminate duplicative type declaration. With Zord, you can declare a validator once and it will automatically create the static TypeScript type. And of course, as I said, it's also used for validation, so it's super useful. And yeah, there are a lot of different advantages here which you can have a look at. I will leave the documentation in description if you want to have a look. So in this video, we are not going to create anything, but instead we are going to explore this package. Okay, so we are in our terminal. Let's create a simple TypeScript project to test this out. So we are going to create a new directory. I'm going to call it Zord test. We are going to go into Zord test and let's do npm init. If you are using npm, you might want to use npm init. Perfect. And now let's install TypeScript first. So npm I, it's going to be developer dependency. So I'm just going to type TypeScript. Let's install this. It should not take a lot of time. Just to be clear, you can also use JavaScript with this. It also works, but you cannot generate static types and use it inside JavaScript, of course. So let's install Zord now. So npm install Zord. One thing we forgot is to initialize the TypeScript config. So we are going to use npx tsc init. This should generate the, yeah. Now to run the project, we also need something called as tsnode to make things simpler. So we're going to install tsnode, npm install. It's going to be developer dependency and tsnode. Okay, now let's create a new file called index.ts and we are going to work with this. So I'm just going to do code dot and open our Visual Studio Code. It opened in the different monitor. I don't know why, but yeah, here we are. So we have this index.ts file, which is basically empty. We have tsconfig.json, with a bunch of config, and we can get started. We also have Zord installed. So how do you create a schema using Zord? So you need to import Z from Zord. This is one of my most favorite imports of all time. I'm telling you this. So now what you can do is you can create any schema. So I can say my first schema, and this can be anything. This can be an object with a lot of different things. I forgot to use const. Yeah. So let's start with basics first. Let's just make it a string. This should be a string, not some crazy object with all sorts of data. So I'm just going to do z.string. This itself implies that this is supposed to be a string, and it should only accept string if validated against. So there are different things. So if there is no string provided, you can have required error and you can say string is required. And there is also one type error, invalid type error. If somebody say passes in a number, you can say we only accept strings. Perfect. Now what you can do is you can run validations against this. So how you can do that? So what you simply do is you can say my first schema.parse, and now you can pass in anything here. So the data, in our case, the data is just going to be a string. So we can simply pass hello, and we will also have a console log here, console.log. Let's have everything looks fine. So if the validation fails, this code will never be executed because it will throw an error. So if we save this, we need to also create a new script here. So let's make this dev, and we are just going to say ts node index.ts. Let's save this. Let's go back, and I'm going to do pnpm dev. Everything looks fine because everything is fine. It's a string, and that's the only condition we had, and it's required. So if I just passed in something else, so if I passed in 1 here, and if I save this and run this again, it should throw me an error. Yep. And the coolest part is that you have this errors array here, which gives you everything wrong about your schema, like everything wrong about the input which was checked against your schema. So in our case, there was only one input, so it's going to say that we only accept strings, and you have this message here. So if you are using an API, you can simply pass on this message to the client, and the client will display it. It's pretty convenient. And now we are done with our first schema. Now let's move on to something complex. So not really much complex, but let's move on to objects. So what about if you wanted to check an input against an object schema? So to do that, I'm just going to call it this an object schema. You know what, I'm going to call it a user schema. Let's make it a realistic user schema. This is going to be z.object, and now you can open an object here, and you can start having the contents. So I want to have a name for the user, so name should be z.string, and this should be required. So if this is not passed, we should have an error. Name is required, and if number is passed or anything like that, so invalid type error, I'm just going to say name must be string. But there is few more cool things you can do here. It's not just like if the field is required or if the type is same or not. You can do a lot of different things here. So for example, you can set your minimum things. So like you can have the minimum characters this should have. In my case, if I want the name to have 3 characters at minimum, or like 2, I don't know, like many people might have just 2 characters in the name. I'm not trying to discriminate here, but you can have max here, and you can specify the max. So you don't want people to type in 30 characters, so you can have 30. But there needs to be an error message for these, right? So you can what you can do is for each of these you can pass in a second parameter, which is simply an error. So you can say name must be at least 2 characters, and I'm just going to copy this and paste it here, except this time name must be below 30. I guess I will leave it this to 10. I know some of you might have bigger names, but let's just keep it simple for now. And then after name, I think we should have an email also. So for email, it should be of course a string, which is required. So I'm just going to copy this. Email is required, and there is one more cool thing about it, that you can set it to be an email. If you use this, the regex, you don't need to do regex yourself. It will automatically check if it's an email format or not. So if you pass in a random string, it won't accept it. And there are a lot of different types. You can also use an URL if you want to, but in this case we are using an email. And if it's not an valid email, you can pass in an error here. We don't have a type error here because we're already checking the type in the string. So, and email is of course a string, so you can have an error message here, which is invalid email, I guess. It took me a lot of time to think about the error. And then you can have things like website. So let's use the URL thing here. So it should be z.string. I'm going to copy everything here. z.string, its website is required, and you can have a URL here, invalid URL. Perfect. Now you have the schema. Now like we did in the last time, we can simply check the data against the schema. So for example, let's construct our data here. So we are going to have this data with a name as a, let's try to have some errors. So first of all, we need a name with a string. So let's have a name with just one character. So I'm just going to call it A. Then let's have an email with some random string, just my name, I guess. And then let's have website normal. So https atharva.codes. I'm designing the portfolio, by the way. Don't go to this website right just yet. And if you go and if you find something, I probably might have already created the portfolio. So yeah. And now let's check this data. So we are going to do, what was this? User schema dot parse, and we are going to pass in the data. Now we should have 2 errors according to our schema. Let's see if we have those errors or not. So let's do npm dev. Yeah, we only have 1 error here. So it's, we only accept strings, and it's for okay. Oh yeah, I think we need to fix these. Yeah, we need to fix this. Some string. Yeah, we left the previous error there and we tried to run again. So let's try doing this again. Yeah, now we have 2 errors. The first error is too small, and which has, the path is not displayed, but the path here should be technically the email. So it's an array with, so it has an array with a lot of different paths. So paths are basically the keys here. So if you are using a form in basic something like React, you can display error near those fields using that path property by parsing it. So you have 2 here. So one is too small, name must be at least 2 characters, and we don't have any email, invalid string, invalid email. I thought we did have invalid email. Yeah, is it? Yeah, the message is invalid email. Perfect. I kind of got lost there. So yeah, now let's try to fix these. So I can say Atharva. I think this is well over 10 characters. For email, I'm just going to use hey@atharva.code. This is my real email address. And yeah, let's try to run this again. We should have 1 error. Oh, everything looks fine. Really? Yeah, this is alright. This, okay, it was 30, right? Yeah, let's just keep it 10 for now. I want to show you the error that it actually displays. Perfect, it says too big. Name must be below 10 characters. You can use this message in your API response or in your React form handling. By the way, I already have a video on React hook form which actually uses Zord behind the scenes, so you might want to check it out. And I think it's going to be pretty amazing and pretty dope for your forms because it makes things a lot simpler and you have full control over the validation and stuff. So yeah, let's fix this now. The name is just going to be Atharva, and let's try to run this again. Perfect, everything looks fine, and yeah, that's amazing. Okay, real quick, as I mentioned, you can generate types using this schema. So what you can do here is you can create a new type. I'm going to call it user schema, and now we can say z.info, and we can pass in type of user, actually user schema. Now this will return us the type. Now we can quickly have a look at the type if we hover about this, and we can say the type is name, email, and website, which all of them are string. Of course, they won't have all of those email and validation stuff because Zord is doing that for you. But I think this itself is a pretty cool feature if you want to generate types and share those across different places to know, have a better idea, or just have a brief idea about how things are working. Or if you have a shared library with your front end and back end, I think this should help you. So yeah, this is how you can generate types from your Zord schema. Now I want to show you the same thing using Express. So if you're creating an API and receiving inputs from any kind of front end or through an API request, raw API request, you might want to have a check on the input which is being provided. So technically what you are doing exactly always is running if statements and doing stuff like that, but Zord makes it a lot more easier. So let's do that. So let's first create a new Express application. So I'm just going to call it Zord Express test. Let's go to Zord Express test, and now I'm just going to do pnpm init. Let's install pnpm install express and Zord. We are not going to use TypeScript in this one because we already saw how it works with TypeScript. So let's do code. Let's just create the index.js first. Let's do code dot, and we should be in our code editor, and we should have the index.js file here. Now we can start working. So we can say const express is equal to require. I hope require works. Yeah, express. And now we can have const app is equal to express. So if you don't know express, this is just a library used to create HTTP servers. So I will have a MERN stack tutorial out pretty soon, but I think many of you should have knowledge about express, and if not, this video is going to be heavily focused only on Zord. So I will try to explain everything as we go. So here we had just created an express instance, and now we can start listening to routes. So first of all, let's listen to a port. So we are going to do app.listen. I'm going to listen on port 5555, actually 5050, and let's have a callback telling that the server is running. So I'm going to console.log server is running on 5050. Perfect. And now we can have app.post. We are going to create a post route with the route of /data, and we are going to have the request response, and this is going to be a callback. Now what we can do is we can create a schema. Actually, you know what, I want to create the schema inside this. This is not the best practice, but you could have this in a separate file, but I want to keep things simpler and I want to create the schema here. So I'm just going to say const input schema. I'm going to use z. I need to import z. So const z is equal to require Zord, and now we can start working. So I can say z dot object, and the inputs I want is name, which is going to be z dot string, and required errors, name is required. We also need a type one, so let's have the type one. Hold on, and name must be a string. And now we want email. We won't need a lot of time because we already see how this works, so we are just going to use this. And for email, we also going to have email, and email is invalid. Perfect. This is the perfect schema we need. For name, of course, we are going to have min again, and we are going to say 2. Name must be at least 2 characters long. Thank you GitHub Copilot for completing this code for me. And after we have defined the schema, we can check the input using the schema. So what we are going to do, usually what Zord does is it throws an error if the validation failed, but in this case we are using a server, and if we throw an error, the user will not receive any response, or else they will get a 500 error, which means that the server occurred an error, which is really not the case. We want to pass in the correct errors. So what we can do is we can perform the input validation in a try catch block. So I'm going to have an error object here, and we are going to try to parse this. So we are going to use input schema dot parse, and we're going to pass in request dot body. That reminds me that we are using a JSON body, so we need to use the middleware. So we are going to use app.use express.json. Now this will allow us to use JSON data as input. Perfect. Now we are going to do input schema dot parse request dot body, and if the validation passes, we are just going to say rest.json, which will be success true. And for catch block, what we are going to do now, since we are using JavaScript, we don't need to do any checks here, but if we were using TypeScript, I would quickly tell you what you want to do. So we would use basically this. If error dot is an instance of z.zord error, then you could pass in the errors. I think you can also do this for JavaScript. I think it's a very good practice, because you can get the IntelliSense stuff. So return rest.status 400.json, and we can pass in errors. It should be error.errors. Perfect. Now errors is going to be an array, as we saw, and we are just going to pass this in. Now one more advantage of the if block I can think is like for now we only have one thing here, but what if we had like multiple statements that could potentially produce an error? I think in that case it's very important to check what is the type of the error, and that way we can recognize what really caused the error and we can pass in the appropriate response. So yeah, this is what we are doing, and I think we should start running. So we can say node index server running on port 5050. Now let's open Thunder client. You can also use Postman or anything. Let's create a new request. I'm going to say HTTP, except in this one it should be 5050, and this is going to be a post request. The body is going to be JSON. So we had name and email. So name should be Atharva, and email should be Atharva. No, it should be actually hey at atharva.codes. Perfect. Let's send. Success true. Now if we mess up the email, like if I just delete everything and just leave it to hey, we will say email is invalid, and we have this as an HTTP response. Now if you are getting this into React, you can pass this error and do whatever you want to do, or yeah, that's basically, I think this is a very good way of handling errors of input, and yeah, I think Zod is very good for that, and I think you should use Zod for any kind of validation. So yeah, that's it for this video. If you found this video helpful, make sure you click the like button, hit the subscribe button, and share this with your friend so that they can also enjoy the same knowledge that you are enjoying right now. If you have any suggestions, make sure you leave them in the comments. I recently dropped a big long video about creating a blog using Hashnode and Next.js. So if you want any big builds like that, make sure you leave them in the comments below and I'll make sure to make that. And yeah, what do you think about Zod? Do you think it's useful, and would you like to use it in your, I don't even know what to say, like any application, server, scripts or whatever? So let me know in the comments below what's your opinion about Zod. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.